The August sun hit Atlanta like a hammer against hot steel. By 7 in the morning, the asphalt already shimmered with heat waves, distorting the skyline into a hazy mirage of glass and concrete. Lieutenant Sarah Collins stepped out of her cruiser and felt the humidity wrap around her like a second uniform. She wiped a bead of sweat from her temple and reached for the rear door, where K-9 Max waited with his ears perked forward, his amber eyes tracking every movement on the street. Max jumped down with practiced grace, his black and tan coat gleaming under the relentless sun. His paws touched the hot pavement for only a second before he adjusted his stance, and Sarah made a mental note to keep their outdoor time brief until the temperatures dropped. 7 years of partnership had taught her to read every twitch of his muscles, every flick of his ears. Right now, Max was alert but calm, scanning the parking lot of the Atlanta Police Department's central precinct with the focus of a seasoned professional. The precinct building rose before them, a monument of brown brick and tinted windows that had witnessed decades of crime and justice. Sarah clipped Max's lead to her belt and walked toward the entrance, her boots clicking against the concrete with a rhythm that matched her heartbeat. Today was supposed to be routine: paperwork, equipment checks, a possible training session with the newer K-9 teams. Nothing that would require her to draw her weapon or send Max into a dangerous pursuit. After the intensity of the past few weeks, she welcomed the respite. The automatic doors slid open, releasing a wave of conditioned air that made Max's nostrils flare. Inside, the precinct hummed with its usual morning energy. Officers gathered around desks, coffee cups in hand, voices overlapping in a symphony of reports and casual banter. Sarah nodded to a few familiar faces as she made her way toward the K-9 unit's office, Max trotting beside her with his tail held high. She'd almost reached the hallway when Sergeant Diane Reeves intercepted her path. Diane was a solid woman in her 50s, with silver-streaked hair pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail, and reading glasses perpetually perched on her nose. She handled administrative matters for the precinct with the efficiency of a military general, and her expression right now suggested that something had disrupted her carefully organized morning. Sarah stopped. Max sat automatically, his gaze fixed on Diane with polite curiosity. Diane lowered her voice, though the busy lobby made eavesdropping unlikely. "Lieutenant, I need to give you a heads up before you hear it from someone else." Sarah felt her shoulders tense, though she kept her face neutral. "What is it?" "There has been a formal complaint filed against you. Came in first thing this morning, before I even finished my coffee." A complaint. Sarah let the words settle in her mind, searching for any recent incident that might have warranted such action. She ran her operations by the book, treated her colleagues with respect, and had never once been accused of misconduct in her years of service. "Who filed it?" Diane glanced around, then leaned closer. "Officer Tyler Brandt, the new transfer from Savannah. He claims you were unnecessarily harsh and authoritarian during yesterday's warehouse sweep. Says you humiliated him in front of the team." Sarah blinked. The warehouse sweep had been a routine operation, checking an abandoned building on the south side for signs of squatters after neighbors reported suspicious activity. Tyler Brandt had been assigned to her unit for the day as part of his orientation period. She remembered him now, a young man with sandy hair and an eager smile that seemed slightly too polished. He had asked a lot of questions, which she had answered patiently. He had also made a few rookie mistakes, which she had corrected firmly but without malice. "I corrected his positioning," Sarah said slowly. "He was standing in a potential crossfire zone. I told him to move." That was it. Diane shrugged. Apparently he felt it was more than that. He used words like demeaning and unprofessional in his statement. Sarah exhaled through her nose. Max, sensing her shift in mood, pressed his shoulder against her leg in a gesture of quiet support. She reached down and scratched behind his ears, grounding herself in the familiar texture of his fur. "Where is the complaint now?" "With Captain Morrison. He wants to see you in his office at 9. Said to tell you not to worry, that it is probably nothing, but protocol requires a conversation." Sarah nodded. "Fine. I will be there." She continued down the hallway, her mind churning despite her outward calm. Complaints from rookies were not unheard of. Some new officers struggled with the chain of command, interpreted direct feedback as personal attacks. Usually, these situations resolved themselves after a conversation and a cooling-off period. But something about this felt different. Tyler Brandt had seemed perfectly fine yesterday, even thanked her at the end of the shift. Why would he file a complaint 12 hours later? The K-9 unit's office was a modest room, with cinder-block walls painted a cheerful shade of blue and a large window overlooking the training yard. Photographs of past and present K-9 teams lined one wall, dogs and handlers captured in moments of triumph and camaraderie. Sarah spotted herself and Max in several of them, frozen in time at award ceremonies and community events. Max had his own small corner of fame in this precinct, and she had never let that go to her head. She settled into her chair and began reviewing equipment logs on her computer, though her thoughts kept drifting back to Tyler Brandt. Max curled up beneath her desk, his head resting on her boot, his breathing slow and steady. The morning crawled by in a haze of forms and requisitions, punctuated by the occasional greeting from passing colleagues. A few gave her sympathetic looks, which told her the news of the complaint had already spread through the precinct grapevine. Sarah ignored the glances and focused on her work. At 5 minutes to 9, she stood and straightened her uniform. Max rose with her, stretching his long body in a graceful arc, before falling into step at her side. Captain Morrison's office was on the second floor, a corner room with wide windows and a perpetual smell of old coffee. Sarah knocked twice and waited. "Come in." Captain Harold Morrison was a large man with a kind face weathered by decades of service. His desk was cluttered with files and photographs, and a faded Atlanta Braves pennant hung on the wall behind him. He gestured for Sarah to sit as she entered, then noticed Max and smiled. "Bring him in too. I have got some treats around here somewhere." Sarah allowed a small smile. "Max knows he's supposed to stay professional during meetings." Morrison chuckled. "He can make an exception. Sit down, Sarah. This will not take long." She sat in the worn leather chair across from his desk, Max settling at her feet with his usual quiet dignity. Morrison shuffled through a stack of papers, found the one he was looking for, and set it in front of him. "I assume Diane told you about the complaint." "She did." Morrison leaned back in his chair, studying her face. "Tyler Brandt, 3 months out of Savannah. Good test scores, decent evaluations from his previous department. He claims you spoke to him in a demeaning manner during yesterday's sweep, called him incompetent in front of other officers, and made him feel unwelcome in the unit." Sarah kept her voice level. "I corrected his tactical positioning because he was standing in a dangerous spot. I did not call him incompetent. I did not raise my voice. I treated him the same way I treat any officer who makes a mistake in the field, with a direct correction and an expectation that they learn from it." Morrison nodded slowly. "That is what I figured. I've worked with you for 6 years, Sarah. You're not the type to humiliate anyone." He tapped the complaint with his finger. "But I have to follow procedure. There will be a review, some interviews with officers who were present, standard stuff. My advice is to go about your business and let the process work itself out." Sarah felt some of the tension leave her shoulders. "Yes, sir." "Off the record," Morrison added, lowering his voice, "something about this kid rubs me the wrong way. He has been here 2 weeks and already filed 3 requests for special assignments, 2 equipment complaints, and now this. Either he has got a chip on his shoulder, or he is trying to make a name for himself the wrong way." Sarah filed that information away. "Is there anything else?" "No. Just keep doing your job and keep Max out of trouble." Max lifted his head at the sound of his name, and Morrison tossed him a treat from a jar on his desk. The dog caught it mid-air with a snap of his jaws, then settled back down with a satisfied expression. Sarah left the office with her mind slightly more at ease, but still troubled by an undercurrent she could not name. Tyler Brandt was an unknown quantity, and unknowns made her uncomfortable. She had survived this long in law enforcement by trusting her instincts, and right now her instincts were whispering that something about this situation did not add up. The rest of the morning passed without incident. Sarah completed her paperwork, supervised a training session with 2 junior K-9 handlers, and ate a quick lunch at her desk while Max dozed beneath it. The heat outside had intensified, and the precinct's air conditioning struggled to keep up. By early afternoon, the building felt thick and sluggish, like everyone was moving through invisible syrup. At 2:30, Officer Janet Park appeared in the doorway of the K-9 office. Janet was a compact woman with sharp eyes and a reputation for meticulous work. She handled evidence processing for the precinct and took her job seriously. "Lieutenant Collins, got a minute?" Sarah looked up from her computer. "What is it?" "We are doing an inventory sweep of the evidence room. Standard quarterly check. I could use an extra pair of eyes, and honestly, I could use Max's nose. We had some issues last month with mislabeled containers, and I want to make sure nothing got cross-contaminated." Sarah considered for a moment. Evidence work was not typically part of her duties, but she had helped Janet before when complex cases required a K-9's olfactory expertise. Max was trained to detect a wide range of substances, and his nose had uncovered discrepancies that human eyes had missed. "Sure, let me grab his working harness." Max perked up at the word harness, recognizing it as a signal for activity. Sarah retrieved the sleek black vest from its hook and fitted it onto his body, adjusting the straps with practiced hands. He stood perfectly still during the process, then shook himself once when she finished, ready for whatever came next. The evidence room was located in the basement, accessible only through a secured corridor with multiple checkpoints. Janet led the way, swiping her badge at each door, while Sarah and Max followed. The temperature dropped as they descended, the basement's climate control working overtime to protect sensitive materials. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow on the grey concrete walls. The room itself was a labyrinth of metal shelving units, each one packed with boxes, bags, and containers marked with case numbers and dates. The smell hit Sarah the moment she entered, a mix of dust, old paper, plastic, and the faint chemical undertones of evidence that had been catalogued and forgotten. Max's nostrils flared. Processing the complex tapestry of scents, Janet handed Sarah a clipboard. "I will start at Section A. You take Section C. We are looking for anything that seems out of place, mislabeled, or improperly sealed. Max can do his thing. Just let me know if he alerts on anything." Sarah nodded and led Max toward the far end of the room, where Section C sprawled across 3 rows of floor-to-ceiling shelves. The boxes here were older, some dating back years. She began checking labels against the master list, a tedious but necessary task that required focus and patience. Max worked alongside her, his nose sweeping over boxes and bins with systematic precision. Every few minutes he would pause, sniff more intently at a particular container, then move on when he found nothing of concern. Sarah watched him with quiet pride. He was in his element here, doing the work he had been trained for, and she could see the focus in his amber eyes. They had been at it for nearly an hour when Max's behavior changed. He had been inspecting a shelf at knee height, his nose tracing the edges of sealed evidence bags, when suddenly he froze. His body went rigid, ears flattening against his head, tail dropping low. A soft whine escaped his throat. Sarah crouched beside him. "What is it, boy?" Max pawed at the shelf, his claws clicking against the metal. He was alerting, but not in the way he did for drugs or explosives. This was something else, something that had triggered his training in a way she had not expected. She pulled on a pair of nitrile gloves and began examining the containers on the shelf. Most were standard evidence boxes, properly labeled and sealed. But near the back, partially hidden behind a larger box, she found a small plastic bin that did not match the others. It was newer, cleaner, and its label was handwritten rather than printed. Sarah pulled the bin out and opened the lid. Inside, resting on a bed of crumpled newspaper, was a police badge. She lifted it carefully and turned it over, reading the number engraved on the back. Her stomach dropped. The badge belonged to Officer Tyler Brandt. For a long moment, Sarah simply stared at the metal object in her gloved hand. Her mind raced through possibilities, each one more troubling than the last. A rookie officer's badge did not end up in the evidence room by accident. Badges were personal property, carried at all times, secured when not in use. The only way Tyler Brandt's badge could be here was if someone had placed it here deliberately. But why? She looked at Max, who was watching her with an intensity that suggested he understood the gravity of what he had found. "Good boy," she murmured, reaching down to stroke his head. "Very good boy." She replaced the badge in the bin and carried it to Janet, who was working in Section A. Janet looked up as Sarah approached, then frowned at the expression on her face. "What did you find?" Sarah held up the bin. "This was hidden on a shelf in Section C. There is a badge inside. It belongs to Tyler Brandt." Janet's eyes widened. "The rookie who filed the complaint against you?" "The same." Janet took the bin and examined its contents, her frown deepening. "This is not supposed to be here. There is no case number, no proper label. Someone just stuck it on the shelf like they were hiding it." "That is what I thought." Sarah's voice was calm, but her mind was working furiously. "I need to report this to Captain Morrison. Can you secure the bin as evidence?" "Of course. I will document everything." "But Sarah, this is weird. Why would someone hide a rookie's badge in the evidence room?" "I do not know, but I intend to find out." She left Max with Janet and made her way back upstairs, her boots echoing in the empty corridor. The precinct felt different now, charged with a tension that had not existed an hour ago. She passed colleagues in the hallway and wondered briefly if any of them knew something about what was happening. The thought made her uncomfortable. Captain Morrison was still in his office when she knocked. He looked up from his computer with raised eyebrows. "Back so soon? We have a situation." She explained what Max had found, keeping her account factual and precise. Morrison listened without interrupting, his expression growing more serious with each sentence. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "You are telling me that the same officer who filed a complaint against you this morning had his badge hidden in our evidence room?" "Yes, sir." "And your dog found it during a routine inventory sweep?" "Yes, sir." Morrison rubbed his temples. "This stinks, Sarah. This whole thing stinks." "I agree, and I do not think it is a coincidence." Morrison reached for his phone. "I am calling Brandt in here. I want to hear his explanation for why his badge is not on his person." While Morrison made the call, Sarah stood by the window, watching the afternoon sun beat down on the parking lot below. The heat had driven everyone indoors, leaving the lot nearly empty. She thought about Tyler Brandt, about his too polished smile and his sudden complaint. Something was wrong with that picture, and she was determined to find out what. 20 minutes later, Tyler Brandt appeared in Morrison's doorway. He was young, maybe 25, with sandy hair and blue eyes that seemed perpetually wide with earnestness. He wore his uniform crisply, every crease in place, but Sarah noticed that his hands were trembling slightly as he clasped them behind his back. "You wanted to see me, Captain?" Morrison gestured to the chair next to Sarah. "Sit down, Officer Brandt." Tyler sat, glancing nervously at Sarah. He opened his mouth as if to say something, then closed it again. Morrison leaned forward. "Officer Brandt, where is your badge?" Tyler's hand went automatically to his chest, where his badge should have been clipped. His face paled. It should be right here. I had it this morning. Are you sure about that?" Tyler patted his uniform, his movements growing frantic. "I do not understand. I always wear it. I never take it off except when I sleep." Morrison placed the evidence bin on his desk and opened it, revealing the badge inside. "Then can you explain why it was found hidden in the evidence room this afternoon?" The color drained from Tyler's face completely. He stared at the badge as if it were a venomous snake. "That is impossible. I did not put it there. I've never even been in the evidence room." Sarah spoke for the first time. "Someone put it there. And that same someone chose to hide it in a section I was assigned to search." Tyler turned to her, his eyes wide with what looked like genuine confusion. "Lieutenant Collins, I swear I did not do this. I do not know what is going on. You filed a complaint against me this morning. 12 hours after you thanked me for a productive day. I did not file any complaint." The room went silent. Morrison and Sarah exchanged glances. Morrison pulled out another sheet of paper. "This complaint, bearing your signature, was submitted to my office at 07:15 this morning." Tyler took the paper and read it, his face cycling through confusion, disbelief, and fear. "This is not my signature. I mean, it looks like my signature, but I did not write this. I never said any of these things." Sarah studied him closely. His reaction seemed genuine, but she had seen skilled liars before. Someone who could forge a signature and plant evidence was not above putting on a convincing performance. "Officer Brandt," Morrison said slowly, "either you are telling the truth and someone is setting you up, or you are lying, and this is some elaborate scheme that I do not understand. Either way, we have a serious problem." Tyler's hands were shaking visibly now. "Captain, I am telling the truth. Someone is trying to frame me. Or maybe they are trying to frame Lieutenant Collins. I do not know. But I would never file a false complaint, and I definitely did not put my badge in the evidence room." Sarah made a decision. "Captain, I would like to investigate this further. With your permission, I want to pull security footage from the evidence room and the administrative office where complaints are submitted." Morrison nodded. "Do it. And Brandt, you are on desk duty until we sort this out. Do not leave the building without checking with me first." Tyler nodded miserably. "Yes, sir." Sarah left the office with a new sense of purpose. Whatever was happening here, it was bigger than a rookie's grudge or a simple misunderstanding. Someone was manipulating events inside the precinct, and she intended to find out who. She collected Max from the evidence room, where he had been patiently waiting with Janet, and made her way to the security office. The officer on duty was a middle-aged man named Frank DiMaggio, who spent most of his shifts watching monitors and complaining about his back. He looked up with mild interest as Sarah entered. "Lieutenant, what can I do for you? I need footage from the evidence room and the administrative office. Everything from the past 48 hours, Frank whistled. "That is a lot of footage. What am I looking for? Anyone accessing the evidence room who should not be there, and anyone submitting paperwork to admin who matches Officer Tyler Brandt's description." Frank nodded and began pulling up files on his computer. "This will take a while. You want to wait, or should I send it to your terminal?" "I will wait." Sarah settled into a chair, Max at her feet, and watched as Frank navigated through hours of surveillance footage. The evidence room cameras showed a steady stream of officers coming and going, each one swiping their badge at the entrance. Frank slowed the playback whenever someone entered Section C, but most of the visitors were familiar faces conducting legitimate business. Then, at 3 a.m, a figure appeared on the screen. The person was wearing a uniform but kept their face angled away from the camera, as if they knew exactly where the blind spots were. They moved quickly to Section C, placed something on a shelf, and left within 2 minutes. Sarah leaned forward. Can you enhance that? Frank zoomed in, but the image remained frustratingly unclear. The figure was average height, with a build that could belong to dozens of officers. The uniform looked standard issue, nothing distinctive about it. What about the admin office? Sarah asked. Frank switched feeds. The administrative office was quieter, with fewer visitors. At 7 in the morning, a figure approached the complaint submission desk and handed a folder to the duty officer. Again, the person kept their face averted, using a baseball cap to shield their features from the camera. Same person, Frank observed. Look at the posture, the way they walk. It is the same build. Sarah nodded. This was not Tyler Brandt. The rookie was taller, broader in the shoulders. Whoever was on this footage was deliberately disguising themselves. Can you trace where they went after leaving each location? Frank tried, but the figure seemed to vanish each time they exited the camera's range. They knew the building, knew the surveillance system, knew how to move without being seen. This is someone who works here, Sarah said quietly. Someone who knows our procedures inside and out. Frank looked uncomfortable. That is a disturbing thought. Sarah thanked him for his help and left the security office, her mind churning with new information. Max walked beside her, his presence a steady comfort in a situation that grew more unsettling by the minute. She needed to think. She needed to figure out who would benefit from framing Tyler Brandt and making it look like she had been the target of his complaint. The layers of deception suggested a sophisticated mind, someone who was playing a longer game than a simple act of revenge. Back in her office, Sarah began making a list of everyone who had access to both the evidence room and the administrative office. The list was depressingly long. Detectives, sergeants, lieutenants, support staff, even maintenance workers had varying levels of access to different parts of the building. Narrowing it down would take time she was not sure she had. Max, sensing her frustration, pressed his head against her knee. She looked down at him and felt some of the tension ease. You always know when I need grounding, do you not? His tail wagged once, a silent acknowledgement. She was about to dive into personnel files when her phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. Stop digging, or the next badge in evidence will be yours. Sarah stared at the screen, her pulse quickening. Whoever was behind this knew she was investigating. They were watching, waiting, trying to scare her off. She was not easily scared. She screenshotted the message and forwarded it to her personal email, then made a note of the time and number. The threat was vague, but unmistakable. Someone inside the precinct was protecting a secret, and they were willing to go to significant lengths to keep it hidden. Sarah spent the next 2 hours cross-referencing access logs with the timestamps from the security footage. The evidence room entry at 3 in the morning had been made using a badge belonging to Officer Marcus Webb, a 20-year veteran who was currently on medical leave following knee surgery. Sarah called the hospital where Marcus was recovering and confirmed that he had been in bed at the time, nowhere near the precinct. Someone had stolen or cloned his badge. The administrative office submission was trickier. The duty officer that morning, a civilian employee named Patricia Huang, remembered receiving the complaint folder but could not provide a clear description of who had handed it to her. She said the person had been wearing a uniform and a cap, spoke in a low voice, and left quickly. Did they say anything specific? Sarah asked. Patricia thought for a moment. They said they were submitting a complaint on behalf of another officer, said the officer was too nervous to do it himself. I did not think much of it at the time. It happens sometimes. Sarah thanked her and hung up, adding another piece to the puzzle. The perpetrator had not just forged Tyler's signature, they had personally delivered the complaint, using a cover story to avoid suspicion. She was dealing with someone meticulous, someone who planned their moves carefully. That level of attention to detail suggested experience, Perhaps someone who had been in law enforcement long enough to understand how investigations worked. Her phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. Final warning. Sarah deleted the message without responding. Empty threats would not deter her. She had faced armed criminals, pursued suspects through dark alleys, stared down danger more times than she could count. A coward hiding behind anonymous texts was not going to stop her from finding the truth. She decided to take a different approach. Instead of searching for the perpetrator directly, she would look for the motive. Why would someone want to frame Tyler Brandt? Why make it look like he had filed a complaint against her? What did they gain from creating conflict between a rookie and a lieutenant? The answer came to her slowly, emerging from the fog of possibilities like a shape resolving in the mist. Distraction. The complaint, the hidden badge, the mysterious texts, all of it was designed to distract, to keep her focused on internal drama while something else happened elsewhere. But what? She pulled up the case files she had been working on over the past month. Most were routine matters, drug busts, stolen property, minor assaults. Nothing that seemed significant enough to warrant this level of interference. Then she found it. 3 weeks ago, she and Max had assisted in a raid on a warehouse in the industrial district. The operation had netted a significant quantity of counterfeit merchandise, designer handbags, and watches that were being sold online as authentic. The case had seemed straightforward, a clear-cut counterfeiting operation with ties to an organized crime network. But there had been something else at that warehouse, something that had bothered Sarah at the time, but that she had not pursued. In a back office, she had found a set of ledgers that did not match the merchandise. The numbers were too large, the transactions too frequent. She had flagged them for review, but had not heard anything since. She searched for the case file and found that it had been closed 2 weeks ago. The official report stated that all evidence had been processed and the investigation concluded. But Sarah knew that was not right. She had personally tagged several items for further analysis, and none of them appeared in the final report. Someone had tampered with the case. She felt a chill run down her spine, despite the precinct's warm air. If someone inside the department was connected to the counterfeiting operation, they would have every reason to suppress evidence and eliminate threats. And Sarah, with her attention to detail and her relentless K-9 partner, was definitely a threat. The complaint against her made sense now. It was designed to damage her credibility, to make her look unstable or vindictive. If she tried to raise concerns about the case, her superiors might dismiss her as someone with an axe to grind. Tyler Brandt was collateral damage, a convenient scapegoat whose presence at the warehouse sweep made him a useful pawn. By framing him as the complainant, the real perpetrator had created a conflict that would consume both of their attention. Sarah needed proof. She needed to find the original evidence from the warehouse raid and compare it to what was listed in the official report. But accessing that evidence would be difficult, especially if someone was watching her movements. She looked at Max, who was watching her with his head tilted slightly, as if he could sense her thoughts. "You found one badge today," she murmured. "Think you can help me find something bigger?" His tail thumped against the floor. Sarah waited until evening, when the precinct had quieted down and most of the day shift had gone home. The summer sun was finally setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple visible through her office window. She had spent the afternoon appearing to work on routine tasks, giving no indication that she was planning anything unusual. At 7 o'clock, she clipped Max's working harness on and led him toward the elevator. The night shift officers paid little attention as she passed. It was not unusual for K-9 handlers to work odd hours, especially when active cases demanded it, but she did not go to the evidence room. Instead, She headed for the records archive in the basement's east wing, a dusty repository of old case files and administrative documents that few officers ever visited. If the original evidence logs from the warehouse raid still existed, they would be here. The archive was accessed through a heavy metal door that groaned as it opened. Inside, rows of filing cabinets stretched into the darkness, their surfaces coated with a fine layer of dust. Sarah flicked on the fluorescent lights, which buzzed and flickered before settling into a steady glow. Max's nose went to work immediately, sweeping across the floor and the lower shelves. He was not searching for anything specific yet, just mapping the sense of the space. Sarah moved to the section marked with the month of the warehouse raid and began pulling files. The official case file was there, matching the digital version she had seen on her computer. But behind it, stuffed into the back of the drawer, she found something else, a manila envelope marked personal. Inside were the original evidence logs, handwritten and unsigned. Sarah spread the papers on top of a filing cabinet and compared them to the official report. The discrepancies jumped out immediately. 17 items listed in the original logs were missing from the final report. Among them were the ledgers she had found in the back office. She was photographing the documents when Max's posture changed. He had been sniffing near the archive entrance, and now he was standing rigid, his ears forward, his body oriented toward the door. Someone was coming. Sarah quickly gathered the papers and tucked them back into the drawer. She was straightening up when the archive door swung open and a figure stepped inside. It was Lieutenant Derek Fawcett. Fawcett was a tall man with a permanent scowl and a reputation for ambition. He had joined the department around the same time as Sarah, and they had always maintained a professional but distant relationship. He was in charge of the administrative division, which gave him access to almost every part of the precinct. "Collins, what are you doing down here?" Sarah kept her voice casual, following up on some old case files. "Thought I might find some useful precedents for a current investigation at 7 in the evening. In the archives." She shrugged. "You know how it is. Quiet time is the best time for research." Fawcett's eyes narrowed. He looked at Max, who was watching him with an intensity that made most people uncomfortable. "Your dog seems tense. He's always alert." "Part of his training." Fawcett took a step closer. "I heard about the complaint against you. And the badge business. Quite a day you have had." Sarah did not flinch. "News travels fast." "It does." Fawcett's voice dropped. "Some friendly advice, Collins. Let it go. Some cases are not worth pursuing. Some questions are better left unasked. Is that a warning? It is wisdom." He smiled, but there was no warmth in it. "Go home. Get some rest. Tomorrow is a new day." He turned and walked out of the archive, his footsteps echoing in the corridor. Sarah waited until the sounds faded, then let out a breath she had not realized she was holding. Fawcett. It made sense now. He had access to the evidence room, the administrative office, the records archive. He controlled the flow of paperwork through the precinct. If anyone could tamper with case files and plant false complaints, it was him. But why? What was his connection to the counterfeiting operation? Sarah needed more evidence. She needed something concrete that would tie Fawcett to the warehouse and the missing ledgers. Accusations without proof would only make her look paranoid, especially with a complaint already on her record. She led Max out of the archive and back upstairs, her mind racing with possibilities. Fawcett had known she was down there, which meant he was watching her. The threatening texts, the stolen badge, the forged complaint, they were all his work. He was trying to derail her investigation before she got too close to whatever he was hiding. She stopped at the K-9 office to grab her jacket and keys. As she was locking the door, her phone buzzed again. This time, it was a call from a number she recognized. Captain Morrison. "Sarah. Where are you?" "Still at the precinct, sir. Get up to my office." "Now." She found Morrison pacing behind his desk, his face flushed with agitation. He looked up as she entered, his expression a mixture of anger and concern. "Close the door." Sarah obeyed, then stood at attention with Max beside her. Morrison stopped pacing. "I just got a call from Internal Affairs. Someone reported that you were seen removing files from the records archive." Sarah felt the floor shift beneath her feet. "I was reviewing old case files. I did not remove anything. That is not what the report says." Morrison's voice was strained. "They are sending someone over tomorrow to investigate. You are being accused of tampering with evidence." The trap was closing around her. Fawcett had moved faster than she anticipated, using his position to turn the investigation against her. By morning, she would be suspended, her credibility destroyed, her ability to pursue the truth eliminated. "Captain," she said carefully, "I believe I know who is behind this, and I believe it is the same person who planted Tyler Brandt's badge and forged the complaint against me." Morrison stopped pacing. "Who?" "Lieutenant Derek Fawcett." Morrison stared at her. "Fawcett? That is a serious accusation, Sarah. He has been with the department for 15 years. He has commendations, awards, a spotless record, and access to every part of this building." She explained her theory, the missing evidence from the warehouse raid, the suspicious ledgers, the patterns of deception. Morrison listened without interruption, his expression growing darker. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment. "If what you are saying is true, this is bigger than a departmental matter. This is criminal conspiracy." "Yes, sir, but you do not have proof. You have suspicions, theories, and some missing paperwork. Internal Affairs is not going to accept that." Sarah took a breath. "Then I need to find the proof. Tonight, before they can bury it." Morrison looked at her, then at Max, who was watching the exchange with calm attention. "If you go digging around and you are wrong, your career is over. And if I am right and I do not act, whoever is behind this gets away with it." Morrison was quiet for another long moment. Then he sighed and sat down heavily in his chair. "I did not hear this conversation. I do not know what you are planning. Officially, you are going home to rest before your meeting with Internal Affairs tomorrow." He met her eyes. "Unofficially, do what you need to do. But be careful. Thank you, sir." She left his office with renewed determination. Morrison had given her tacit permission to investigate, but he had also made clear that she was on her own. If things went wrong, he would not be able to protect her. She collected the documents she had photographed in the archive and studied them more closely. The missing ledgers had been catalogued with a specific evidence number. If she could find where they had been moved or destroyed, she would have concrete proof of tampering. But the evidence room was being watched. She could not simply walk in and start searching without alerting Fawcett to her intentions. Max. She looked down at her partner, who was waiting patiently for direction. "I need your nose again, but this time we are looking for paper, old paper, with a specific scent." She retrieved one of the original evidence logs from the archive and let Max sniff it thoroughly. His nostrils flared as he processed the scent, memorizing the unique combination of ink, paper, and age that distinguished these documents from others. "Find," she said, giving him the command. Max's demeanor shifted instantly. He was no longer a companion waiting for guidance. He was a working dog on a mission, his entire being focused on the task at hand. They moved through the precinct together, Sarah trusting Max to lead the way. He passed the evidence room without hesitation, his nose pulling him in a different direction. Down the corridor, past the break room, toward a section of the building that housed administrative offices. Max stopped outside a closed door. Fawcett's office. Sarah's heart pounded. Breaking into a superior officer's office was a serious breach of protocol, but the evidence she needed might be just beyond that door. She checked the corridor, empty. The night shift was skeleton staff, and most of them were concentrated at the front of the building. She tried the handle. Locked. Max whined softly, pawing at the base of the door. Sarah made a decision. She pulled out her lockpick set, a skill she had learned early in her career and maintained for emergencies. Within 30 seconds, the lock clicked open. She slipped inside with Max, closing the door behind her. Fawcett's office was neat and orderly, everything in its place. His desk was clean except for a computer, a phone, and a small stack of folders. Sarah moved quickly, conscious that every second increased the risk of discovery. Max went straight to the desk, his nose leading him to a drawer on the right side. He pawed at it insistently. Sarah opened the drawer and found what she was looking for. The missing ledgers from the warehouse raid, still in their evidence bags, but hidden beneath stacks of personal documents. She photographed everything, then carefully replaced the items exactly as she had found them. The photos would not be admissible in court, but they would give Captain Morrison enough cause to order a formal search. She was about to leave when she noticed something else in the drawer, a burner phone. She turned it on and found a record of text messages, including the threats that had been sent to her earlier that day. Fawcett had made a mistake. He had kept the evidence of his own crimes, probably out of arrogance or a belief that he would never be caught. Sarah photographed the phone and its contents, then powered it down and returned it to the drawer. She had what she needed. She led Max out of the office, relocked the door, and headed for the exit. Her pulse was racing, but her movements remained calm and controlled. Years of training had prepared her for moments like this, when the pressure was intense, but panic was not an option. She was almost at the parking lot when a voice called out behind her, "Collins, stop right there." She turned. Fawcett was standing at the end of the corridor, his face twisted with fury. "You think I did not know what you were doing? I have cameras everywhere." Sarah kept her voice steady. "Then you know I have evidence of your tampering. The ledgers, the burner phone, all of it." Fawcett's expression flickered. "You broke into my office. Anything you found is inadmissible." "Maybe, but it gives Captain Morrison probable cause to order a legal search. And once Internal Affairs sees what you have been hiding, your career is over." Fawcett took a step forward. "You have no idea what you are dealing with. This goes beyond me, beyond this precinct. There are people who will not let this come to light." Sarah held her ground. Max stood beside her, his body tense, his eyes fixed on Fawcett with predatory focus. "I have faced worse," Sarah said quietly, "and I have never backed down." Fawcett's hand moved toward his belt, where his service weapon was holstered. Sarah's own hand mirrored the movement, her fingers brushing the grip of her gun. For a long moment they stood frozen in a standoff that could have exploded into violence at any instant. Then footsteps echoed in the corridor, and Captain Morrison appeared, flanked by 2 Internal Affairs officers. "Lieutenant Fawcett," Morrison said, his voice heavy. "Step away from Lieutenant Collins. You are under arrest for evidence tampering, filing false reports, and conspiracy." Fawcett's face went pale. "Morrison, you do not understand. You do not know who you are crossing. I know exactly who I am crossing, and I know that Lieutenant Collins provided enough information to justify this action." Morrison gestured to the Internal Affairs officers. "Take him." Fawcett looked at Sarah, his eyes burning with hatred. "This is not over." "Actually," Sarah said, "it is." She watched as the officers handcuffed Fawcett and led him away. The precinct was going to be in turmoil for days, maybe weeks, as the full extent of his crimes came to light. But the truth was out, and that was what mattered. Morrison approached her. "You took a hell of a risk tonight. I know, but I had help." She looked down at Max, who was finally relaxing, his tail beginning to wag. "He found the badge that started all of this, and he led me to Fawcett's office." Morrison smiled, some of the tension leaving his face. "Remind me to give that dog a commendation. He would prefer a steak." Morrison laughed, a sound that seemed to release some of the night's accumulated stress. "Done. Now go home, Sarah. Get some rest. You have earned it." She nodded and led Max toward the exit. The night air was cooler now, the oppressive heat of the day finally breaking. Stars were visible above the city lights, faint but persistent. At her car, she opened the rear door and let Max jump in. He settled onto his blanket with a satisfied sigh, his mission complete. Sarah slid into the driver's seat and sat for a moment, letting the events of the day settle in her mind. She had started the morning with a complaint against her and ended it by exposing corruption at the highest levels of her precinct. It had been a long, strange journey, full of twists she had not anticipated. But that was the nature of the work. You never knew what each day would bring, what secrets would emerge, what truths would demand to be uncovered. All you could do was follow the trail, trust your instincts, and rely on the partners who had your back. She glanced in the rearview mirror at Max, who was already dozing, his legs twitching in the early stages of a dream. "Good boy," she whispered. "The best boy." She started the car and drove home, leaving the precinct behind. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new mysteries, new battles to fight. But tonight, she had won. And that was enough. The investigation into Derek Fawcett's activities expanded rapidly over the following days. Internal Affairs discovered that he had been receiving payments from the counterfeiting ring for over 2 years, using his position to suppress evidence and protect the operation's key figures. The missing ledgers contained records of these payments, along with names and account numbers that led investigators to a network spanning multiple states. Tyler Brandt was cleared of all suspicion. The forged complaint was formally withdrawn, and he received an apology from the department for the distress he had experienced. He approached Sarah the day after Fawcett's arrest, his face a mixture of relief and gratitude. "Lieutenant Collins, I do not know how to thank you. I thought my career was over before it even started." Sarah shook his hand. "You were caught up in something that was not your fault. Just learn from it. Stay alert, and always trust your instincts." He nodded earnestly. "I will, and I hope we get to work together again sometime. Properly, I mean." Sarah smiled. "I would like that." The precinct slowly returned to normal, though the absence of Fawcett left a void that took time to fill. His responsibilities were distributed among other officers, and a new lieutenant was eventually transferred in to take his place. The culture of the department shifted subtly, becoming more vigilant, more aware of the potential for corruption, even among trusted colleagues. Sarah received a formal commendation for her role in exposing Fawcett. The ceremony was brief and understated, exactly how she preferred it. Captain Morrison pinned the medal to her uniform while Max sat beside her, his own commendation ribbon attached to his harness. "This department owes you both a debt," Morrison said. "You showed courage, integrity, and persistence in the face of intimidation. Those are the qualities that make a great officer and a great team." Sarah looked down at Max, who was watching the proceedings with patient dignity. "We just did our job, sir, and that is exactly why you are the best at it." After the ceremony, Sarah took Max to his favorite park on the outskirts of the city. The late summer afternoon was warm, but pleasant, with a gentle breeze rustling through the trees. She threw his ball again and again, watching him race across the grass with boundless joy. It was moments like these that reminded her why she did this work. Not for the commendations or the recognition, but for the simple satisfaction of making things right, of standing up to injustice and refusing to back down, of protecting the innocent and holding the guilty accountable. Max brought the ball back and dropped it at her feet, his tongue lolling in a happy grin. She knelt down and wrapped her arms around his neck, breathing in the familiar scent of his fur. "You know what I love about you?" she murmured. "You never make things complicated. You just follow your nose and trust where it leads." Max licked her face, his tail wagging furiously. She laughed and stood up, wiping the slobber from her cheek. "Come on, partner, let us go home." They walked back to the car together, side by side, as the sun began its slow descent toward the horizon. The city spread out before them, a sprawling tapestry of streets and buildings and lives, intertwining in ways both visible and hidden. Somewhere in that city, new crimes were being committed, new mysteries were waiting to be solved, new challenges were preparing to emerge. But for now, in this moment, Sarah and Max had earned their rest. They had faced the darkness and emerged victorious. They had proven that integrity still mattered, that truth still had power, that the bond between a handler and her K-9 could overcome any obstacle. Tomorrow, they would return to work. Tomorrow they would answer new calls, pursue new leads, face new dangers. But tonight they were simply partners, enjoying each other's company, grateful for the peace they had fought so hard to protect. The drive home was quiet, the radio playing softly in the background. Max dozed in the back seat, his body relaxed after the excitement of the park. Sarah drove with one hand on the wheel, her mind wandering through the events of the past week. She thought about Fawcett, about how easily he had hidden his crimes beneath a veneer of professionalism. She thought about Tyler Brandt, about how close he had come to having his career destroyed by someone else's malice. She thought about the counterfeiting ring, about the web of corruption that had stretched into the heart of her own department. It was a reminder that evil could wear many faces, that the enemy was not always obvious, not always external. Sometimes the greatest threats came from within, from the people you trusted, from the institutions you believed in. But it was also a reminder that integrity mattered, that one person, one dog, one determined team could make a difference, that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, could always be brought to light by those willing to dig for it. Sarah pulled into her driveway and turned off the engine. The house was dark, waiting for her return. She lived alone, her work consuming most of her time and energy, but she never felt truly solitary, not with Max by her side. She opened the back door and let him jump down. He stretched luxuriously, then trotted toward the house with the confidence of a dog who knew exactly where he belonged. Inside, Sarah went through her evening routine, feeding Max, showering off the day's grime, changing into comfortable clothes. She poured herself a glass of water and settled onto the couch, Max curling up beside her with his head on her lap. She turned on the television, more for background noise than actual entertainment. The local news was covering Fawcett's arrest, showing footage of him being led out of the precinct in handcuffs. The anchor described it as a major breakthrough in the fight against organized crime, praising the unnamed officers who had uncovered the conspiracy. Sarah smiled wryly. Unnamed. That was fine with her. She had never sought recognition, never needed external validation. The work was its own reward. Max looked up at her, his amber eyes soft and trusting. "You want to know a secret?" she asked him. "All of this, the investigations, the dangers, the long hours, it is worth it because of you. Because I know that no matter what happens, you have got my back, and I have got yours." Max's tail thumped against the couch cushion. She scratched behind his ears, feeling the tension of the past days finally beginning to release. The case was closed. Justice had been served. Tomorrow would bring new challenges. But tonight she could simply be grateful for what they had accomplished. Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She glanced at it and saw a text from Captain Morrison. "Congratulations again. The department is lucky to have you both. Get some rest. You have earned it." She typed a quick reply. "Thank you, sir. See you tomorrow." She set the phone down and closed her eyes, letting the quiet of the evening wash over her. Max's breathing slowed as he drifted into sleep, his warmth a comforting presence against her side. The city hummed outside her window, alive with the perpetual energy of millions of people going about their lives. Most of them would never know about the events of the past week, about the corruption that had been uncovered, about the officers and K-9 who had risked everything to bring the truth to light. and that was fine. Sarah did not work for public acclaim. She worked because it was right, because someone had to stand in the gap between order and chaos, between justice and impunity, because the world needed people who were willing to do the hard things, the dangerous things, the necessary things. She opened her eyes and looked at Max one more time. His face was peaceful, his body relaxed, all traces of the day's intensity gone. "Sleep well, partner," she whispered. "We did good today." Then she leaned her head back against the couch and let herself drift off, the sounds of the city fading into the background as sleep finally claimed her. The alarm woke her at 5 the next morning, as it did every morning. Sarah rose, stretched, and began her routine: exercise, breakfast, preparation for the day ahead. Max followed her through each step, his energy renewed by a night of rest, his eagerness for the new day evident in every movement. At the precinct, the atmosphere was different. There was a sense of renewal in the air, a collective relief that the corruption had been excised. Officers who had eyed each other with suspicion were now exchanging genuine greetings. The trust that had been damaged was slowly being rebuilt. Sarah reported to Captain Morrison for her morning briefing. He looked tired but satisfied, the weight of the past week evident in the lines around his eyes. "Internal Affairs finished their preliminary report," he said. "Cosette is looking at federal charges on top of the departmental ones. The counterfeiting ring is being rolled up as we speak. 6 arrests so far. More to come." "That is good news, sir," Morrison nodded. "It is, and it is thanks to you." He paused. "There is talk of promoting you, moving you up to captain, giving you your own command." Sarah felt a flicker of surprise. "I appreciate the consideration, sir, but I am not sure that is what I want." "No?" She shook her head. "I am effective in the field. That is where I belong. That is where Max belongs. We do our best work out there, not behind a desk." Morrison smiled. "I told them you would say that, but the offer stands whenever you are ready." "Thank you, sir." She left his office and headed for the K-9 training yard, where Max would get his morning exercise. The sun was already climbing in the sky, promising another hot day. But the heat did not bother her anymore. It was just part of the job, part of the city, part of the life she had chosen. Max bounded ahead of her, his enthusiasm undiminished by the warmth. She watched him run and felt a surge of affection so strong it almost brought tears to her eyes. This was her life, this was her purpose, this was where she belonged. And as long as she had Max by her side, she knew she could face whatever came next. The training yard was empty at this hour, the other handlers not yet arrived. Sarah let Max off his lead and watched him explore, his nose working overtime to catalogue all the scents that had accumulated overnight. She pulled out his favorite training toy, a rope with rubber grips, and gave it a shake. Max's head snapped toward her, his entire body quivering with anticipation. "Ready?" she asked. He barked once, sharp and eager. She threw the toy across the yard, and Max launched after it like a missile, his powerful legs eating up the distance in seconds. He snatched the toy from the air and raced back to her, depositing it at her feet with a triumphant expression. They played for 20 minutes, the simple joy of the game washing away the last remnants of the week's stress. By the time the other handlers began arriving, Sarah felt refreshed and ready for whatever the day might bring. She was walking Max back toward the precinct when her radio crackled. "All available units, report of suspicious activity at the waterfront. Possible connection to ongoing investigation." Sarah looked at Max. He looked back at her, his ears perked forward, his body already tensing for action. "Duty calls," she said. She clicked the lead onto his collar and headed for her cruiser at a brisk jog. The waterfront was a 15-minute drive from the precinct, through morning traffic that was just beginning to thicken. As she drove, she thought about the day ahead. The Fawcett case was closed, but its ripples were still spreading. The counterfeiting ring had connections throughout the city, and dismantling it completely would take months of additional work. Today's call might be related to that effort, another thread in the larger tapestry of the investigation. Or it might be something entirely new. That was the nature of police work. You never knew what each day would bring. The waterfront came into view, a stretch of industrial docks and warehouses that dated back to the city's heyday as a shipping hub. Most of the buildings were abandoned now, their windows broken, their walls covered with graffiti. It was a popular spot for criminal activity, secluded enough to avoid casual observation, but accessible enough for quick escapes. Sarah parked her cruiser at the edge of the scene and surveyed the area. Several other units had already arrived, their officers forming a loose perimeter around a particular warehouse. She spotted Sergeant Reeves coordinating from the command post and made her way over. "What do we have?" Reeves looked up from her tablet. Anonymous tip came in about suspicious activity inside that building. Caller said they heard voices and saw lights moving around. Could be nothing. Could be related to the counterfeiting case. Sarah nodded. "You want Max and me to do a sweep?" "That is exactly what I want. But be careful. We do not know what we are walking into." Sarah returned to her cruiser and retrieved Max's tactical harness, the one equipped with a camera that transmitted video back to the command post. She fitted it onto him, checking each strap for security, then gave him the command to focus. His demeanor shifted instantly, the playful companion vanishing, replaced by the focused professional she relied on in the field. They approached the warehouse together, Sarah's hand resting on her weapon, Max's nose working the air for any sign of danger. The building loomed before them, its corrugated metal walls streaked with rust, its loading dock doors hanging askew. Sarah found a side entrance that was slightly ajar. She paused, listening, but heard nothing from inside. She looked at Max, gave him the silent command for caution, and pushed the door open. The interior was dark and cavernous, filled with the skeletal remains of old machinery and stacks of rotting pallets. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light that penetrated the grimy windows. The smell was a mix of rust, mold, and something chemical that Sarah could not immediately identify. Max moved forward, his nose sweeping back and forth across the concrete floor. Sarah followed, her weapon drawn, her senses alert to any movement or sound. They cleared the first section of the warehouse without incident. The second section was more cluttered, filled with abandoned equipment that created numerous hiding spots. Sarah's pulse quickened as she navigated through the maze, checking each corner, trusting Max to alert her to any threat. Then Max stopped. His body went rigid, his nose pointing toward a closed office door at the far end of the space. Sarah approached the door carefully, pressing her back against the wall beside it. She listened but heard nothing. She looked at Max, who was watching her intently, waiting for her command. She took a breath, then kicked the door open and swept inside, her weapon leading the way. The office was empty, but on the desk, arranged in neat stacks, were boxes of counterfeit merchandise, identical to what had been seized in the warehouse raid 3 weeks earlier. Sarah holstered her weapon and keyed her radio. "Command, this is Collins. We have a secondary stash site. Counterfeit goods consistent with the Fawcett investigation. Recommend full crime scene processing. Copy that, Collins. Units are en route." She looked at Max, who was sniffing around the edges of the room, checking for any additional sense of interest. "Good work, boy. Looks like the case is not quite closed after all." She spent the next 2 hours supervising the processing of the scene. More officers arrived, followed by crime scene technicians who photographed and catalogued every item in the office. The counterfeit goods were extensive, representing hundreds of thousands of dollars in potential sales. Sergeant Reeves joined her as the work wound down. "This is a significant find. Fawcett must have had backup locations we did not know about, or partners who are still operating," Sarah replied. We need to track the supply chain, find out who delivered these goods and where they were planning to distribute them. Reeves nodded. I will get detectives started on that. She paused. Good work, Collins. You and Max make a hell of a team. Sarah smiled. We try. She loaded Max back into the cruiser and drove to the precinct, the morning's excitement giving way to the familiar rhythm of routine. There would be reports to file, evidence to review, leads to pursue. The work never really ended. It just evolved, each case flowing into the next, each mystery leading to new questions. But that was what she loved about it, the challenge, the purpose, the knowledge that every day brought an opportunity to make a difference. She parked in the lot and let Max out, watching him stretch and shake off the dust of the warehouse. His tail was wagging, his energy high despite the morning's exertion. He loved this work as much as she did, thrived on the challenges and the victories. Come on, partner, she said, let us go file some paperwork. Max followed her into the precinct, his presence a constant comfort at her side. Together, they walked through the doors, ready for whatever came next. Because that was what they did. That was who they were. Lieutenant Sarah Collins and K-9 Max, partners in justice, protectors of the innocent, hunters of the truth. And as long as there was work to be done, they would be there to do it.